Okay, so this is very similar to what the National Weather Service actually did this year, which is a big difference in what they've done last year. Really gets into the technical side of spotting, and we'll probably spend the last third about being safe in spotting and talking about risks. Part of this is straight from the National Weather Service, and we're going to go over storm basics, tornadoes, watches and warnings, being safe, and weather spotting. So the first thing is, everybody's seen a whirlpool in the bathtub, right? Why does it do that? Why does it create that?
Cornell's effect. Cornell's effect.
Yeah.
Did I not pronounce it?
No, yeah. Coriolis. But the whole idea is, when you pull the plug, there's a drain. All the water's trying to get out. And it's just nature's way of organizing all that mass convergence into a central area. And as it gets closer, it gets faster, because that's how it gets the water down the hole. Well, a tornado and a lot of these things we like to add are the same thing, except instead of going down, the air is going up. But when it converges on a very tight location, where there's just one small area to pull that air up really strongly, that's when we get that spin. If the air is going in and up into a storm, it's got to go somewhere. And in the northern hemisphere, we have low pressure. It has to vent out to the top, and that has a lot to do with defining the dynamics of days that are potential for supercells, because when that storm rises, that air has to go somewhere. In the northern hemisphere, that's a counterclockwise rotation, and if it's a high pressure where we have sinking air, it's a counterclockwise rotation. If you know that you're kind of in an area where there's potential for storms and under low pressure, you can actually tell where the low pressure is just by putting your hand out to the left and about 20 degrees forward, because that air is going counterclockwise, so it has to be on your left side with the wind to your back, and because the air is going to go in slightly and not just around, you can point forward, and you'll be very close to where that low pressure is. Well, nature repeats itself. We actually have that low pressure spin in a large scale. We call that a mid-latitude cyclone. It's common in this part of the United States. Our classic low pressure may be associated with just rain, snow, any type of storms, all the way up to severe. As that gets smaller, a hurricane is also a low pressure. If you ever look at a hurricane on the satellite, it always looks like the bands are going out, right? Because you're seeing the upper level. At the lower level, that air is converging in around that eye wall. It rises up sharply through the eye wall, and then it gets blown out. So it looks like there's not a convergence with a hurricane. Then we have the supercell. The supercell in itself has a low pressure area of rising air. And then when it gets to a very finite location of rising air, it will create a tornado possibly. And then the smallest scale we have are the gustnadoes, dust devils, or fire nados. And again, a fire nado is just a rapid column of rising air in a very concentrated location. And so nature tries to organize that convergence by creating the spin that then goes out. So what makes a particularly severe storm? Well, it's the dynamics of the atmosphere. Wind, temperature, and water. For wind, to make a severe storm, we need a change in speed and direction, and I'll show you a graph on that. And with temperature in and of itself, moist heat is a great fuel for thunderstorms, but by itself is an untapped source of energy. When you have differential heat, hot and cold, that can actually help create some of this forcing mechanism that can cause the storm to rise, and then it's that moisture that gets released in the air. That's why that hot, humid day is our classic setup for a severe thunderstorm, because that stored energy, and when it gets a chance to release, when it condenses into water, it releases latent heat, and then the thing just explodes up and out. So when we're into the supercell type, we have to have the instability, warm, moist air. We have to have shear, strong winds that are not going the same speed throughout the atmosphere, and then some sort of forcing mechanism, something that has to get it started. Sometimes that comes from the top. If you've heard, there's a cap. We have this warm air aloft that keeps the storm from expanding. We get an upper level jet that comes through and knocks that cap loose. That can allow the storm to blow up. Or sometimes just a front or a dry line coming through can push and collide enough to give that a push to get it started. Those are the things that actually make predicting severe thunderstorms difficult. The thing called the cap is that warm moist air, or warm dry air over cooler air, sits there and creates this inversion. And it's like a pot boiling, and they just sometimes don't know if that lid will come off or not. If it comes off, those can be like the greatest days of storms, and sometimes they don't. I drove clear out to northern Kansas once. It was going to be a perfect storm. The cap never broke, and just pure chance on there. So this is a classic setup for severe thunderstorms. We have low pressure. We have that counterclockwise rotation bringing warm moist air up from the Gulf of Mexico, kind of creating a warm front. We've got cool, dry air circulating around the back. And then, again, for that air to want to rise up through that low pressure, something has got a vent at the top. And when the jet stream crosses over that jet stream creates kind of a vacuum, a little Venturi effect that will help draw that air up and give it a place to vent. The jet stream, the best place to have the low pressure is in this quadrant of the jet stream, because if the jet stream comes around this corner, it compresses, and then after it comes out of this corner, it diverges and actually starts to create a little vacuum at the highest levels. So when we're looking at the effect of wind shear, there's kind of two things we look at. We look at the direction differential and the speed differential. And each of these points is a different altitude, but this is a compass. So here the wind is out of the south, slightly out to the southwest, southwest, southeast, and northwest. Here we have, if we were to have storms, they would just be single cells. There's no real, there's some directional shear, but the wind speed is so low, there's nothing that makes this storm want to form. If you take a water hose and you squirt it straight up, it collapses on itself, right? That's a summertime thunderstorm. You may get the lift, but it goes up and it's going to collapse under its own weight. What changes into a supercell is when you tilt that hose a little bit, and now that water falls out ahead of itself. Now it's going to go much higher, and it's going to continue unimpeded. So when we see a supercell, what we see is a change in direction starting at the southeast, very quickly moving to the southwest with a marked increase in speed that creates not only a directional shear, but an altitude shear. And that will help get that air turning that can then be taken up into a supercell. A squall line, and you'll see them talk about this if you look at the technical. We have speed shear. We go from 20 to 30 to 40 to 70 knot wind speeds, but it's all the same direction. So we don't get that rotation. You get the rapidly rising clouds, and they will often push out in a front or a squall line, but you don't tend to get the individual supercells because of the lack of rotation. So those are the kinds of things the Weather Service is looking at when they're trying to forecast. So you can start to imagine the complexities of storm forecasting. We have to look at wind speed, not only now, but forecast as multiple fronts start to collide. We've got to look at the temperature and the humidity of each of those and exactly where they're going to meet and come together. So when we start looking at a specific supercell, we have this speed shear where the wind is going faster above the ground than it is at the ground level and even higher, and that starts this barrel roll on the ground. And then if we get the vertical shear also and some sort of vacuum where we have that jet stream diverging at the top, creates a little vacuum, that allows that to pull this cone and turn it vertical. And this is basically a very small low pressure cell. Low pressure means there's less pressure because it's being pulled up from the top or venting at the top, and that draws air in at the surface. What makes it a supercell is that there has to be enough push that when that air gets to the top and that water condenses, that rain will fall somewhere out ahead of it or downwind from it. That allows it to perpetuate. If it were a summer thunderstorm, we wouldn't have this jet stream. The cloud would go up, the water would condense, and it would fall down on itself. But here we can get a perpetuating storm. So there's several features when we're starting to look at supercells that we want to watch for. The first thing is the rain and the hail tend to fall forward of the storm's direction. because as the air goes up, it gets blown over by the jet stream and then down. You may have a little squall line out in front. You'll have this forward flank downdraft, so as it comes in, you'll get a little bit of a squall line front, perhaps. One of the things they really believe sustains severe thunderstorms, we've got warm air coming in here. We get what they call this rear flank downdraft. Cool air coming around, it undercuts that warm air and helps push that warm air up into the storm, and it's self-perpetuating. And knock this over, sure as heck. And then when it hits a jet stream, it will vent out and then get blown away. And that keeps that vacuum. So this is as much air being pulled up into the vacuum of the jet stream as it is being pushed in, because the wind isn't being pushed in from the outside, it's being sucked up through this storm. Another way to look at it, and when people say, well, why does a tornado form? This is kind of, when we look at the bottom side of the supercell, we have to think of like an iceberg, where the tip is a small part that we see. A typical supercell thunderstorm may be 30 to 50,000 feet tall, reaching up to the jet stream. However, the lower the cloud deck is, the more likely you are to get a tornadic supercell, because think of this as a syringe. You're drawing all that air up. The smaller that air can be drawn from, the higher the wind speed is going to have to get the air up in there. If the cloud deck is really high, there's not that impetus to have a high speed flow into a central column. And in fact, when they say, if you ever see them talk about high-based thunderstorms, they may be supercell, but the tornadic risk is very low. When we get a cloud-based under 3,000 foot, particularly down around about 1,000 foot, then they're much more likely to be tornadic, because all that air has to be sucked into a smaller space and therefore has to develop a higher wind speed to get up in there. The other thing is people don't really understand why tornadoes create so much damage, but then I've got this machine sucking air up 30,000 feet from the last 10% of the ground below it, and that can create quite a vacuum effect. So if we take that, we look at it from the side, we're going to flip it on in and look at the graphics. We talked about that mid-latitude cyclone, a big low pressure, maybe a warm front, maybe a little cold front. That's actually what's going on in a supercell on a much smaller basis. We have an updraft zone right here. We have the warm, moist air coming in. And if you are on the south end of a severe thunderstorm that doesn't have anything else around it, you will feel that warm, moist air blowing into the storm. If it's quiet, it's not drawing much. That will kind of create an artificial front here. Air starts going up into the storm. You get this rear flank downdraft that comes around that helps undercut that on a continuous basis. And then it circles up into the storm. Now, a few things that you can watch for to help identify that it's a supercell. Number one, it should go all the way up to the jet stream. Now, it may take a little while to build there. That's when we'll see that anvil top. Once it hits the jet stream, it will start getting blown off. You can tell a few things about its strength. Number one is that overshooting top. When it bubbles up, if it's got a lot of energy, it just doesn't stop when it hits the jet stream. It's going to overshoot and then come back down. Also, if it back builds this anvil back shear, remember the anvil, if you know anything about jet streams, they're running 60 to 150 miles an hour. In fact, it was last month, there was a huge storm off the Atlantic coast, and jets were making it from New York to London in record time because of the tailwind of the jet stream. They were like cutting hours off of it. So if you're getting back shear, that means that energy is so strong it's working against the jet stream because of its explosive force. And then just if you watch the actual clouds, if they look hard as opposed to real soft, that means they're freshly building. If you watch a storm that builds up, you have real hard bubbles, and then as the storm starts to die out, they'll all get washed out and you can't define the little edges to it. And you can watch a storm rapidly building and literally see the clouds going up. But the time that it hits the jet stream and you get that anvil effect, and especially if you have the back shear, then you're very likely talking about a supercell, because it takes a lot of energy to get up there, and once it hits jet stream, we know that rain is going to get pushed downstream and allow it to perpetuate the upflow and the water falling down on the other side. So let's look at a couple different views of underneath the storm, so what we want to be identifying. This is the Trenton tornado from 2014. This is a very weak radar echo, but just we're going to use that because of the actual radar view at the time. It's so pixelated because we're so far away, and it's the only one I could get. A very classic hook echo, though, is going to look like this, where you have the warm air coming in. The condensed cool air is what creates radar echoes. The warm air itself doesn't, but when we get rain droplets, that's what the radar will reflect off of. So we've got the warm air coming in, the cool wet air coming down. This is where the rain is falling. This is where you'll have most of the lightning. And then this band right here, between this, where the wall cloud would be, and this main part of the storm is also called, that open area is called the vault. It's kind of something you can use to help identify where a wall cloud is versus the rest of the storm. And this edge back here tends to also have the strongest tail. That's something I learned from Andy Bailey that I did not know about. So let's see what we're looking at. In this case, we're looking to the northeast, and we have several things. We have the warm, moist air coming in. We have this rear flank down. We have a wall cloud here, and the only reason we know it's a wall cloud is a lowering that's persistent in close circulation, which means you have to see air moving across the front and back going in the opposite direction, not just jumble there. You'll also see what's known as a clear slot, where you have dry air, rain-free air coming in, starting to wrap around there. And then oftentimes there's a tail cloud that comes off to the south and southwest out here. When you're looking to the northeast, it's the safest place to be because generally the storm is moving away from you. It's going to go some form of east, normally northeast or southeast. This one was moving east-northeast, as I recall. But the problem is that rain is falling behind your view, and depending on the lighting, you may not get really good visualization of the storm. So it's not the most photogenic location, and that's why some spotters that are out here trying to do this with for photos put themselves in a bad position, which we'll see in just a second. But the features we want to look for are the wall cloud, a clear slot wrapping in, a tail cloud going off, and then usually a space between where the wall cloud would be and the rest of the rain falling downstream. So now this is all the same storm. It is moved by me, and I'm looking to the southeast now. Now to the southeast there's more clear air, so I get better contrast, but I put myself closer to the place where the hail is going to be with that rear flank downdraft and then the major part of the storm. But here I can definitely see a lowering, and if I saw it persistently rotating, that is clouds going in both directions in that small spot, that would be a wall cloud. We have this clear slot back here, and then this right here is the rear flank downdraft, and then there will be a tail cloud coming out here. Sometimes these are really clear and distinct. Sometimes we get muddled with several storms or overcast, and then sometimes we have what's called high precipitation, supercell, where there's so much rain, the rain wraps all the way around the storm and you can't see the tornado at all. Those are dangerous for everybody concerned. Now the storm has moved past and I've changed my position. I'm looking to the northeast again, still the same. I've got the lowering right here, got the clear slot coming in, the rain is all falling to the north and east, and I've got a tail cloud going out this way, and that area called the vault right up in between there. And then finally, looking from to the northwest, the problem is this could be approaching me. It actually is going a little bit to my right, but the people like this because normally the air is clear behind it, and you get the best contrast to view the storm and to take the pictures. But also you could be in the path of that if it were to change directions. And as far as directions and safety goes, I think 90 degrees in either direction from the actual direction is anywhere that can be considered unsafe. And we'll show a couple of examples of that towards the end. But we have a very defined wall cloud here. This one is very, very low. and when we talked about needing that cloud deck for severe supercell to be tornadic, to be very low, 1 to 3,000 feet, look how low this cloud deck is. And not the wall cloud, but the cloud deck itself, where it starts condensing. Very close to the ground, probably under 1,000 foot. And that's probably only 400 or 500 foot. Pretty classic supercell right there. So one of the hard things is for people to differentiate things that are they a tornado or not. And I did this class for a rural fire department in Caldwell County. A couple guys asked questions. One of them took my number. And about a month later, he texted me and said, "Man, we've got crazy cloud movement here." It's like, what do you mean? Because the clouds are just going everywhere. And so one of the first things you have to think of is, are they moving up or down, but not rotating? Well, he didn't see any rotation. They were just going every which way. Is there any obvious day for a supercell? I pulled up my radar. Those clouds weren't even showing up on the radar. Remember, for it to be a supercell, to create a tornado, the tornado isn't the driver, it's the passenger. It's that vacuum going up 30 to 50,000 foot that's the driver. You don't get a tornado with a storm that doesn't even show up on radar. It's just not physically possible. So we call this scud, but then some of it can just be verga, the rain shafts coming down. But you know, with low-level irritation, there's a lot of movement of clouds. It's not uncommon, especially when we have a squall line come in. They can be very scary and ugly, and when the wind gust hits, they're pretty impressive. But they're very ragged. There's no organization to them. And so the question is it part of a supercell? Do you have persistent rotation? Do you see a debris cloud or touching the surface, which the literal definition of tornadoes, you have to see it touching the ground or see the debris. And see, all this is just condensing air because of the moisture and the heat as it rises into the cloud. But there's no one defined place where it's rising. There's no clear rotation to it. It's just a whole bunch of air rising and condensing into clouds as they get close up to the cloud base. So in April of 2018, I was chasing a lone supercell, clearly a supercell, looked pretty impressive on radar with the shear and everything, and it had this lower. And wasn't real tight, kind of had a shelf cloud out here, but we don't, and I am looking to the pretty much the straight west here. Got some lowering, but it never really rotated. And Glenn kept asking me, is wall clouds a tornado? I cannot tell you. I said, it looks like a wall cloud could be, it looks like what a wall cloud should look like, but I cannot specifically see rotation where some of it's going this way and some of it's going that way. And I watched it for about 20 minutes, and then it finally started dying off. It had great shear parameters at the upper levels, but again, the lower level, that air wasn't being pulled into a narrow enough location, and it probably wasn't just quite low enough to the ground to really pull it in. Never made itself up. But I want you to look at this one. This is in Lafayette County, just southwest of Waverly. Now watch right here. You'll see this part going backwards. This is real time, so it's not fast. You don't see this part in the front coming this way. This is clearly a rotating wall cloud. Part of a supercell, we know, because it put down a tornado earlier. In the appropriate position. Don't have a great clear swath. We have a little bit of one coming this way, and it's moving a little bit to my left to right here. But can you see that rotation? Even you speed them up. And one thing I liked about recording storm chases early on was go back and plan them a little bit faster, because you can really pick out features that you couldn't when you're watching it in real time or trying to watch 3 or 4 other things. Anybody know what that day was? May 22nd, 2011. That was the same time the Joplin tornado was going. So this thing actually ended up creating, is this a funnel or a tornado?
A funnel.
Why?
On the ground.
So we can't see cloud debris, we don't know that it's on the ground. So, so this is going into Waverly Road. Cell but I know I'm behind you.
Also, power lines down just on the west side of the lake.
Now I was talking to Corey Sloan, who was in Cameron. He was reporting this into the weather service. Clearly got debris on the ground from it. At this point, I couldn't say whether it was a funnel or a tornado, but clearly we had debris on the ground from it. It lifted right as it went over the Waverly. You know, just half a mile outside of town. Now it's right over here. Still probably just a funnel, because I can't see it, it's on the ground per se. That out in Saline County, went back down the ground, took out a mobile home and injured a couple of people out there. So, even in real time, you can usually tell the wall cloud, but you gotta watch it. For the public, tornado myth busting. Tornadoes don't hit big cities. Yes, they do. Nashville is a recent example. Tornadoes are attracted to mobile homes? No, but they'll take them out because they're the weakest link. There's just more damage. They can't cross water. So when you think of all of these, go back to that picture with the syringe. We're talking something that's 50,000 foot tall. Do you think anything that's 200 foot or 100 foot tall is going to stop that engine? It does not. You can have tornadoes in the mountains. I actually just picked one up in Woodland Park 4 or 5 years ago. I just happened to be looking around. I was like, tornado. Woodland Park is up in the mountains outside of Colorado Springs. 6,000 or 7,000, probably 7,000 foot. It's up. Because I looked at a job out there one time, so when I saw that, they had a tornado there, F2. They can't go up and down hillsides in the mountains. Now, they're less likely in the mountains because they don't have that warm, moist air. That air tends to be dry at higher elevations. We get the warm, moist air and the cool, dry air converging. That's why the Great Plains are such a good location for them. And you aren't protected from tornadoes by anything, other than maybe a heck of a lot of concrete. What's the worst place to go if you're out on the highway? Anybody see the Under the Girders video from the Kansas Turnpike? That was in Butler County, that's where I started my EMS, and it created one of the worst public relations nightmares for the weather service for tornadoes, because NBC reporter from Wichita was coming back into Topeka on the turnpike, and it runs northeast through the Flint Hills, and the tornado was coming northeast. So they turned around and started kind of chasing it. They got ahead of it. And so they stopped their van, got out, and along with another man and the 2 girls went up and got under the girders for this tornado as it literally passed over them. If you ever go back and watch that video, early on before it gets there, look, and it looks like there's a piece of plywood that's being kicked around. That is actually a van going in over in around this tornado. Now, what made it somewhat safe is there were actually girders, and they got on the abutment, so they were a little bit sheltered from it. So what happened was when the tornado hit Oklahoma City several years later, people tried to get under the girders. Well, those were totally concrete bridges with concrete abutments. There was no place to hide. And those things act as wind tunnels. That low-level air hits those wind banks, and they're going to go over or they're going to go through, and the wind speed actually picks up and goes through there. A couple of people that tried to hide under there, one of them they didn't find for almost a week, and there were a couple of places where you could see outlines of the red dirt where people had been. The girders, getting out of your car, I don't say outrun, but quite frankly, if you can get a 90-degree direction, you're probably better staying in your car and trying to get away with some caveat. You got to believe you can get away. But the biggest thing is, this machine is not just what you see of the tornado. It is being driven by a huge machine that's miles and miles tall. So, how do we know when it's time to start getting ready? TV and broadcast radio, there's a meteorologist down in Kansas City who actually sells his storm forecast, Dan Holliday, and he used to be on KFKF a lot. I have never heard his forecast up here, but at 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning, they always give his little synopsis for the day. The single best thing, if you have any degree of interest in weather chasing, is the Storm Prediction Center. They offer outlooks for 1 day, which is today, the 2-day, which is tomorrow, the day 3, which is 2 days out, and then a conglomerate of 3 to 7 days. And they will use color coding marginal, slight, enhanced in the light orange, moderate in the light red, and then a high risk in the dark red. Now those are the areas where they think there's an overall highest risk of severe storms. When you get into the day one, they'll actually break that out, and I just saw this year, I was telling Nathan, that they actually, in the day two, they will break down additional parameters. You can look at the tornado risk, the hail risk, and the wind risk, because those are the three things that make up the potential of a severe thunderstorm: tornadoes, hail, and severe wind, high winds. And they will break those risks out. This is the best place to see what the risk is looking like. Tomorrow, there's a slight risk down around northwest Alabama, southeast Arkansas. Very low risk for tornadoes, mostly for severe thunderstorms with wind and hail. I say a picture is worth 1,000 words. You can look at that and know if you have a significant risk or not. They will tell you the caveat are those, one of the big things that irritates me most when people say that tornado came out of nowhere. They've been under tornado watch for a day and a half, and they've been under tornado warning. Most of the time, although yes, the tornado has to develop someplace, that storm has to build up, it has to take time, they should catch that on radar, and they should catch the upper level circulation before it gets to the lower level circulation, and they can predict with pretty good accuracy about the time that tornado is going to form, with an average, I think, of 5 to 10 minute lead time, maybe a little bit longer, which is pretty good for predicting the future of nature. However, the national tornado pretty much came out of nowhere. I had happened to look at the risk. There was a low risk for short-lived tornadoes. They had high-risk, long-lived tornadoes that night, and the first tornado that hit the west side of Nashville at the airport had about a 3-minute lead time to the tornado warning. Not enough for anybody to respond effectively. Now the other tornadoes, they had more lead time because it was a problem, but by then getting the word out, and the other problem is this happened from midnight to 2 a.m. We're going to talk about that in just a moment as well. One of the other things is, what is a watch and what is a warning? Watches are watch out, warnings, take cover. Watches are when conditions are favorable. It's a very large area. They're issued hours ahead of time, and it's time to take preparedness steps, know where you are, where you can go, somewhere to happen. A warning means the event is occurring in a very defined area. And in the context of severe weather, we're talking tornado warning, severe thunderstorm, and flash floods. I don't worry about flash floods at my house because if my house floods, you better build an ark. The problem with warnings is you're down to minutes to moments of notice. Hopefully that they've caught that storm as it's building, but sometimes storms rapidly develop. When you have a squall line where you get that, it's called a bow echo, and I'm sure you've seen those on radar. They're mostly straight line winds. But sometimes on the ends of them, if you just think you drag your hand in water, you get those little whirlpools on each side. You can get the same thing with a bow echo sometimes. And so they may have, they call it a quasi-linear convective system. That's trying to say it's a squall line, but it can be a little more complex and maybe some vertical development. Those things spin up so fast that they can't predict them. It's very difficult, unlike an individual supercell. So I think there was a tornado that hit out in eastern Jackson County through Grain Valley. One of the TV stations actually was able to see it with lightning flashes, and it was really not a highly predicted event for tornadoes because it was one of these squall winds. Once we get down to a warning, it's going to be a very defined area that's at risk, based on the storm's direction and its speed, the area that it's going to cover. They changed to what they call the storm-based polygon lines. Polygons just a series of lines that outline a shape. And that gives a better defined area of the risk and the threat than when we use geopolitical boundaries such as counties. The problem is, how do we communicate a polygon? We can, and I think I wrote that. Yeah. So when they have county-based warnings, so here we have 3 supercells, tornadoes in them. When we did it county-based, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 counties would have been warned. I said 8, sorry, almost 1 million people. But really not all those people are at risk. When they go to the polygon warning, they take the area where there's circulation. I don't know if you can see there's a hook echo there, and a hook echo there. They take it based on the speed and its direction, and it's almost invariably a cone that gets a little wider as it goes out. And now, we've covered 70% less area and 600,000 fewer people. And the idea is to avoid calling wolf as much as possible. Well, that's great, and this incredible technology, the problem is we have a real difficulty communicating polygon warnings. How do you say, this part of this county in Arkansas, this part of this county of Arkansas, but not the rest of it? So they'll try to use cities and parts of counties to define this, but there's, I'll talk about it later, but I use a service called Weather Call, at least for my home, and it only goes off if my house, with my latitude and longitude, is inside one of these polygons. I think it's very helpful. Unfortunately, I haven't found any weather radios that you could plug in your lat long and interpret that information. And that's the piece I think we really need to get. Nonetheless, when you look at any radar source online that shows warnings, they'll have these polygons now for tornadoes, severe thunderstorms, and flash floods. So they're much more specific to the area of risk. So at least if people got an alert, they could look online and then pull it down. When I worked at Truman Medical Center, I kind of redefined our tornado warning process, and they were using the polygons, but again, the question was, how do we get that? And I was teaching our hospital operators how to interpret these polygons, and I said, look, if the polygon is anywhere close to where the hospital is, you can announce a tornado warning. But if it's clearly outside, then don't, because Truman Hospital Hill is right in Kansas City. That's the far northwest corner of Jackson County. So if it's out in Lee Summit, it's not a problem for you. And we had great success with that. We reduced the number of warnings that we were announcing, because we're a hospital of 300 patients, some in critical care areas. Some patients would have to be moved into the hallways. There's substantial risk of patients just moving them if that's something that's not going to be a real issue for us. So once the operators felt empowered and supported to make those decisions based on the alerts that we were giving them through a service called InterWarn, we markedly improved our process. What would happen though is either some of the staff or people on TV would be watching on TV in their rooms and say, well, there's a tornado warning for Jackson County. The hospital's not helping us out. And so I had to have some education for the staff. Look, we're watching this. If we're not calling, it's because it doesn't involve our hospital. I did have a conversation. The ICUs had these big columns, and I always told them, you got to get the patient right, so that column is between the window and you. And our maintenance guy said, those windows are rated for 150 miles an hour. I said, not 150 mile an hour 2x4. It's the debris that will break those, not just the wind speed, and there's plenty of debris as we've seen from a tornado. So, the three severe warnings that the National Weather Service issues in the parameters are a severe thunderstorm, where they expect gusts over 58 miles per hour, and that's some fraction of a Beaufort scale, which is why I think they've come up with an odd number of knots. Or hail greater than 1 inch diameter, which is the size of a quarter. When we talk about doing hail, you want to give it in coins or actually measured inches. They do not want marbles because there's no standard size for marbles. You can report, if we aren't in a more life-threatening situation, you can report stronger gusts or smaller hail. That's helpful, but the actual criteria for severe thunderstorm is the 58 and 1 inch. Tornado warning is either Doppler indicated irritation or confirmed reports of a tornado. And we'll talk about why that is important on our perspective. And then a flash flood warning is 6 inches or more flowing water over a roadway, or a rapid rise where the water is a threat to life and property. Basically, water going where it's not supposed to be. So as I said, the National Weather Service has got great resources to get the information. How do you get it into your own hands? Well, there's a lot of network sources, so you have internet-based. Every cell phone that's relatively modern is enabled with the, yeah, except Daryl's.
No, he does have one.
Oh, you upgraded?
I have graduated.
Is susceptible to the wireless emergency alert system. That's from the federal government. And one of the things it will do is notify for amber alerts and tornado warnings. The tornado warning will be based on the cell site that your phone is pinging off of. So there's a fair amount. You could be on the south end of the coverage of that cell tower, and the tornado could be on the north end, and not really a factor, you don't know. But it's a blind alert, and at least puts you in the ballpark of having a chance. Then you can go online and find out. There are a lot of private vendors, apps that you can get on your phone, but almost all of those will alert based on the county. And again, we've had storms go through southeastern Livingston County, just cutting the corner, and we're setting off tornado sirens in Chillicothe under blue skies, and it confuses people if we don't do that. Now, there are a few storm-based ones, which actually look at the storm-based warnings. The one I use is called Weather Call. They do have an app. I've never used the app because I've got so many other sources, but I do have 3 subscriptions, one for myself, one for my daughter's house, and one for my mother-in-law's house. Since I'm paying for it, I also get notified if they have a tornado warning. But it's like $10 a year. You put in your address, we'll find it on a map, you verify that's the correct location, and then you will tell it the type of warnings that you want to be alerted for. I think you can't not uncheck a tornado warning, but you can uncheck like a thunderstorm warning. And then you can tell it you want to be texted, you want a phone call with a voice call, and you want an email. So from my mother-in-law, when my mother was alive, it would call their house, because my mother had no internet access whatsoever, no cell phone, but it would call and she would get a voice and say, "You're under a tornado warning, please take cover." And I would get a notice at the same time, so I could call and make sure she was taking cover. The great thing about this is it's based on the polygon. So only if you're in the actual warned area are you going to get the notification. There's a couple others, Storm Watch Plus and then Storm from Weather Underground. I think they're storm-based, and I can't tell from the Red Cross app, but I'm pretty sure the Red Cross app is based on the county. One of the good things about the Red Cross app it gets into that family safe, where you can help track your own family members and make communication with them, as well as where shelters are when you get open. I always tell people you got to have two sources from at least 2 totally different forms of communication. And quite frankly, simply the second best one is a good old NOAA weather radio. Now, you're going to get a county-based warning, not a storm-based warning, but you're going to find out, again, if you lived in Nashville at 2 a.m., how are you going to get your warning? Do you have your phone with you? Is it going to go off in time? And this is just another backup system. What if the cell tower got hit first? Okay? Can't say the NOAA weather radio won't go down either, because they do, but again, they're totally independent sources. And then, the other thing I think everybody should have is a plain old AM/FM radio. One of the problems we have, we know outdoor warning sirens are only for outdoor notification. Everybody knows that, right? They aren't designed to get people in their houses. And no common thread of how often a tornado siren should go off if there's an ongoing threat. So it goes off, you know there's a tornado warning, but you don't know when it's over. You don't know if it's hit. If it's hit, something bad like Joplin, where are they setting up relief center search? Where can you go for help? How are you going to find that out when the cell towers have all been destroyed? AM/FM radio is the easy thing to do to create a good line of communication. Obviously, amateur radio, we believe, is a great resource as well. So the last thing we're going to do is, okay, we talked about spotting, now we're going to talk about being safe. We have an acronym: awareness, communications, escape routes, and safety zones. So what are we protecting ourselves from, first of all? Well, wind, hail, lightning, and flooding, squall lines, downburst, tornadoes. Now, everybody wants to think their house got hit by a tornado. I don't know why, because I don't care if it got blown away by a squall line that was 100 miles an hour or an EF1 tornado that was 100 miles an hour, but people want it to be a tornado. But what about a downburst? That's when that supercell collapses. Now, you think it being a vacuum cleaner, the think about when all the weight of all that water 4 or 5 miles up suddenly decides it lost its big push and it suddenly comes down. You don't think that can't create a little splatter ground? You bet. They're just as dangerous. They just don't occur as frequently. And then the other thing is hail. 1/4 inch hail, which is just right about here is where we have our severe range. And look, we start hitting the exponential phase of the amount of energy imported by that. And then flash floods. We'll show you a graphic on a flash flood, but so many people just drive into water and then they disappear. There was a sheriff's officer in Greene County outside of Springfield, I think 2 summers ago, and he died, got washed off in his patrol car, couldn't get out. I don't know why, I don't think they ever will. And I went on Google Maps the best I could see where he was, and it was the most innocuous stretch of road and creek that you could imagine. But it's those little ones that come up so fast and go down so fast. And so it may not be the big river flood that's going to take you away, but just that small creek, like the one that goes behind my house. So what is going to kill us? If we look at the light blue 10-year average, floods and tornadoes and heat's not a summertime. Not so much a lightning, but a lot of floods and tornadoes. So that's what we're trying to protect ourselves from. What's the Weather Service phrase for flooding, flash floods? Turn around, don't drown. That's what? That's not 6 inches over the road. It wouldn't qualify for a flash flood warning in and of itself, would it? 3 minutes later, the road is entirely gone. It was already undermined because the water level's up. You couldn't necessarily see it. Heck, I probably would have driven through that. And that was with no load on it. When I lived in Albuquerque, it's really sandy soil, and we had a flash flood on the road that kind of came up to our house, and it cut a transverse ditch that was only about 3 foot wide, but about 6 foot deep. And you may have been able to see it as it went down, but things like culverts get washed out really easy. You may have something holding it up, or something may come and hit the debris that's washed down. That's my biggest fears when I'm storm chasing, is watching out for water on the road and then making sure I can find high ground. My biggest fear is getting caught between 2 places and then the high place isn't high enough. That really is. So how to be safe with the storms is, one is being able to see actual radar in the field for me is phenomenally huge. I remember the first guy I saw storm chasing that had radar in his car, and he had a full-size monitor, 120-volt monitor with some inverter, and a full-size computer, cell service, satellite service. I don't know what he was getting. Even on any aspect, you can get free radar with the storm-based warnings right off the National Weather Service. They're pretty crappy quality, but you can tell where the storm is and where you are. There are a number of subscription services. GR Level 3 is a very good one. It takes a little bit to set up, but it's got the best definition of rotation, and that's why I like it. It's my favorite. However, you pay a one-time fee, and I think it's 60, 70, 80 bucks, and it resides on the PC, so you have to use that computer. What I've used the most, however, is a service called WeatherTap. Again, it's a recurring subscription fee, but it's internet-based. So when I used to work at Truman, I'd be on call. If I wasn't working in the evening, storms were going on, I was tracking them on WeatherTap. You can see all the radars. They have all the different radar products. So you can see the storm relative velocities, the hail velocities. You can bring in spotter network that I'll show you in a minute. A lot of overlays on that, but really easy to use. Is by far the easiest one. On my phone, I have one called Radar Scope, which works great. And then Storm by Weather Underground. And there's a bunch of others, but these are the ones that are more professional level, allow you to look at a lot more detail of things. This is a picture of a screenshot of WeatherTap. So one thing you do, you can add custom locations. This is St. Louis. My best friend Rob lives right there. Got a tornado warning on this cell, severe thunderstorm warning on this cell. I had clicked on the cell T4 right here. This tells you the attributes of the cell right off the radar. Moving 45 miles an hour. There's no tornado vortex signature. The mesocyclone strength is only a 1. That's weak because it was just starting up. Probability of hail is 100% severe hail, over quarter inch is 30%, maximum hail size 0.75. The maximum height, that's not the maximum height of the storm, that's where the most intense returns were, 10,000 foot. But here, the echo top's 30,000 foot. What communities are in the path of that storm based on its current direction at every 15-minute plots? They're all right there. You can do that just by hovering on it and clicking. And it'll do that for every one of those cells. And all that stuff comes straight from the National Weather Service information on the radar and then plotted out through the mapping system that it has. So that's why I like it. So one thing, most of the radar you look at is the red, blue, and greens and yellows and tell us how intense it is based on reflection of water droplets. But when we're looking at tornadoes, we want to know about finding close-in circulations where the air is going in an entire circle in a very small area. And to use that, it uses the Doppler reflection. Now, with Doppler, those water droplets can either be going towards the radar or away from the radar. And the more directly they're going towards the radar and the more directly away, the more intense or bright those two colors are. If the wind is going at a right angle, the radar doesn't see that. There's no reflection of movement with the Doppler. So, if we want a tornado, we've got to have air moving away from the radar and air moving towards the radar in very close proximity to each other. We call that the gate-to-gate shear. They look how close the speed differential is they can actually measure it, because each one of these pixels has a value. But look, very bright green and very bright red and right next to each other. That's a tight circulation at the lowest level the radar can see. And we'll see in a minute how low that is. And up here, it's pretty high. Two things to notice about this. Not only is there a bright green, bright red here, but look, there's another one here. So we have older mesocyclone dying out. As that cold air circles around, it pushes out warm air to the front and can actually create a near circulation that tends to be forward and to the right of the previous one. Well, if you're spotting down here and you're watching that tornado come towards you, don't be surprised if the next one forms right over your head. So the next thing is, you want to be safe. One of the reasons I got into APRS for tracking was for storm spotting. It brings in a lot of information, but it also sends my information out. And in the fire service and law enforcement, any form of public safety, one thing they talk about is personnel accountability. Do you know where your people are? Kind of like with the 10 o'clock news, do you know where your kids are? Well, there's radio that we use. There's graphical. There's a source called Spotter Network. To get on Spotter Network, you actually have to take a test. This shows that you know a little bit about storm development, storm spotting, and then you can get on. I can do Spotter Network through APRS. If you ever look at my thing, there you'll see it's an exclamation point, SN exclamation point. The internet servers will pick that up and send my location out over Spotter Network. The Radar Scope app also has that built in, and I can see myself and everybody else on the Spotter Network just with little red dots on there. There's only a couple people out right now. You can just pass that over. There's just a little red dot. And through that, I can actually send a report. And when you send a report as a Spotter Network member, it goes straight into the NWS chat. So it goes straight to the National Weather Service without any filtering. And then they have people that watch all the reports and they'll grade you and they'll kick you off if you're submitting bad reports. So there's a quality program built into it. This is my Spotter Network based off my APRS at my house. If you go to spotternetwork.org, they actually show a map. And with that, they'll also show a lot of people that are doing live streaming. If you ever want to see those. I was watching somebody live streaming because I was watching storms down at my mom's house, and they literally drove by my mom's house with their camera on. Fortunately, the tornado was already passed. APRS is great. What the weakness of APRS is coverage. I get 10, 15 miles outside of town, I'm going to lose a lot of coverage. And then how fast my interval updates. Spotter Network is almost immediate. I can set my APRS where they need to. And then with my family, I use an app, a free app called Life 360, and it tracks all of our locations at the same time. My daughter doesn't totally like that I know where she is. But it's great because especially when we're traveling, you know, we don't travel together bumper to bumper. They got a kid, we don't have to stop to go to the bathroom. They do, I have to stop. You know, we know where each other is or are, and especially in a crisis, I can quickly see at least their last location. A lot of the fire service, especially volunteers, there's several kinds of apps that they can get where they can do dispatch through their phones instead of radios and pagers. They can report that they're responding, and then also track their location, which is really good. I think the firefighters here have some sort of tracking mechanism as well, but that's one of the big things lacking in firefighters is really close proximity, high resolution detail of where they are, like within a building. So if they got trapped, being able to find them, that's one of the big things they're trying to develop, is being able to triangulate to find firefighters. So why do we need weather spotters? Because the radar can't see everything, and they need ground truth to verify what they're seeing. We talked about that tornado and that low level circulation being the lower 1, 2, 3,000 foot. The radar has to tilt up half a degree at the lowest angle. And then with the curvature of the earth, that thing's shooting off into space. At Brander, the lowest it can see is 4,500 foot, but up at Lyman, it's already well over 11,000 feet. And that is the surface area for the National Weather Service in Kansas City still. So there's a lot of stuff they can't see at the bottom. They can't tell. They can see the mid-level circulations, but they don't know if that circulation has reached the lower levels, such that there could be a wall cloud or a tornado, so they could issue the warning. It's actually more important to have storm spotters out on those fringe areas than in the core areas where they can see better, and you've got a gazillion people looking out their windows anyway. So if you get a report, what do you want to do? You want to do the tell. Time, event, location. Now again, they'll take more reports than just the severe criteria, but to understand what the actual severe limits are, you'll take one of each of those. Tornado, funnel, or wall cloud. The wall cloud's persistently rotating, lowering. Winds over 58 miles an hour. What I'm passing around is a couple forms. One is a weather spotting form, report form. It tells those things that are important criteria. It shows on the back some of the ways to define those criteria. It's got slots to fill it out 3 times. Feel free to make copies. Because I want any amateur guy to be able to take a severe report from somebody that can't call it in and be able to report it. But with this, if you use this form, you'll know what information to get, and it creates a little good tracking, just like we do in the amateur radio messaging. The other form I made just has a list of the repeaters and some of the resources that I've talked about for spotting. So we talked about awareness, we talked about communications, and now we're going to get into the bigger safety is escape zones and safe zones. So one of the first things to know is which direction the storm is going. Generally, the storm is going to be driven by the supercell. The tornado will follow that, and that's going to follow the direction of the anvil, usually, because that's what is creating it. This was May 14th, 99. This was the first big Oklahoma City tornado. The Kansas border, Oklahoma City's right here. See this huge hook echo? Incredibly big. So you're sitting there watching it, looking from the southwest to the northeast because you're in the safe spot, right? What's behind you? Storm number 2. Now when I first started chasing and you get that low cloud deck or at night, I couldn't see what was behind me. So the beauty of radar now is I can see if there's back building behind me. This particular day I was chasing a cell that started up here, came all the way across the state. It was incredible. I saw it from the moment it started up until it died out clear over to the east about 100 miles. Never put down a tornado. Had a great wall cloud for hours. The wall cloud for hours, but never put down a tornado. The other thing about it is they say in the line of storms, they always say the southwestern wind is usually the strongest, tailwind Charlie, because it's got access to the cool air and the more moist air and it's not getting interfered with. But one of the storms right up here, this one went straight east. These two went northeast and had an F4 tornado that hit the southeast side of Wichita that evening. When I drove back home up the turnpike, where there are normally lights in Wichita, it was blacked out due to the storm and power outage damage. But you've got to watch your backside. Then, you gotta watch out when it's dark. Now, I kind of divide my hobby into two parts. Storm chasing is kind of when I go outside the area to go find it. Storm spotting is what I consider what I do anywhere locally, and that's mostly what I do now. I don't storm chase in areas I don't know after dark. This was the day of the Greensburg tornado. Greensburg is in Kiowa County. Here's the state line. I was right here. This is my APRS beacon. If you see, I'm headed north. It is about 8 o'clock. The storm's just come into the county, or into the state of Kansas as a severe thunderstorm. I was set up right at the corner of those three counties for about 4 hours, waiting for this thing to fire. And this was back at, I forget when the Greensburg tornado was, early 2000s. I got a speeding ticket warning on the way down to prove that I was there. But I was basing this on the forecast that I was reading, that there was a good possibility there was going to be severe thunderstorms right where I was, and they were going to be strong and tornadic. And I sit there, and it started getting dark, and there's nothing. And I'm watching, this is all coming across my APRS, okay? No internet connection. So it's putting these polygons in, and that's what Glenn O'Connor is pointing out through our APRS now, are these warning boxes. But look, I'm getting all these tornado warnings up in northern Missouri, Kansas, right where my wife's family lives. I'm like, well, I must have made the wrong choice, but and looking at it, I know I was right. Anyway, they got this severe thunderstorm warning coming in. It's about 8 o'clock at night, it's starting to get dark, and I'm like, okay, to get around to the south side of it to be safe, I'm going to have to drive 45 minutes to an hour probably. I can't see it. I can't drive straight through it because it's dark. This is the one that turned out to be the Greensburg tornado. Probably the best decision I've made in my life. Again, I had nothing to prove. I wasn't storm spotting. I was storm chasing. Area I wasn't that familiar with the roads, and I was just out of position. Listen to it on AM radio the rest of the way home, out of KFH, KFDI radio out of Wichita. That's incredible storm coverage, and they reported it, and I listened to it all the way home. So in addition to those, then we have to watch for forward flank couplings. Now this is the ground path of the Greensburg tornado. In Kansas, those are just mile-wide township roads, the grid. When we started doing the tornado warning training at Trimlin, one of the gals said, well, what if it turns around and comes back? I said, well, it's being driven by this thing that's being driven by the jet stream. The jet stream doesn't turn on a dime. But they can, when they die out, take a big curlicue. I've never seen one that big. What's that? That's almost a 2-mile diameter curve, almost all the way around. Pretty impressive. And notice how fast it goes from about its worst to finishing out. It's almost like they hit a peak and then they run out of energy, or something else happens. But do remember that if you're particularly watching it from the left side, that when they die out, they often curve around. And we're not just talking about the tail on the ground, but the mothership comes around a little bit, just as that's starting to die out. And what's going on? Well, usually that cold rear flank downdraft has come around, cut off the inflow, and created kind of a new front intersection forward and ahead. So look at all these minor, this is all the same parent storm. Right and forward, right and forward, right and forward. And two on the ground at the same time. So situational awareness now with radar is huge. Being in touch, and that's why I talk with Glenn. I can't watch the radar, watch the road, and all that simultaneously safely. But somebody else that's been watching the progression of those can help me out quite a bit as a storm spotter in the field. You see the star up there. There's a city marshal from Maxville that was storm spotting. It was dark. He knew his roads. He knew his community. He knew where the safe place was. His car got rolled a whole bunch of times. He died at the hospital in Wichita. So, as much as you're thinking about where you're going to go, you got to think how you're going to get out. And again, from the direction the storm is going, it's almost anywhere under 180 degrees behind you. You got to look at the current storm, training storms, which are storms back building. It is not uncommon to have more than one tornado coming through an area because that convergence of the perfect air at all the different levels can start at one place, kind of like a stream when you have a stick in it, and that's where everything starts, and it keeps building up as the storms go downstream, and you get another one behind it, another one behind it. That creates flash floods, especially because of the extensive rainfall, but you can get a substantial amount of severe thunderstorms with that as well. And so people going out to rescue, CERT teams, could be hit. There was a police officer killed by lightning after the Joplin tornado, standing in an intersection directing traffic. I think it was a couple days later, but it can happen. Environmental hazards, line down, trees down, may limit your egress. And then traffic. There's about 5 years ago, there was one tornado out in central Kansas, the sole supercell. And it started at McPherson and went northeast for like 2 hours. The traffic jam associated with that was unbelievable. Because everybody saw it, you were relatively safe because the only storm, the rest of the sky was blue, but emergency responders couldn't even get on the roads because there were hundreds of cars. I was chasing out western Kansas with a friend of mine, and there was a really good spot to go chase and a secondary spot. I said, let's go to the secondary because everybody and their dog is going to be on this one. We chased it for a while. I said, didn't panic. I said, let's go to the other one. When we pulled up the intersection, we had to wait for 5 minutes for cars going by chasing that same storm. I said, that's why we're not doing this. And then you got to know, if you can't escape, where are you going to go for a safe zone? I spend a lot of time virtual spotting. It really keeps me up on what's going on. I use the radar. There's a website called Broadcastify, which will do live streaming of public scanners. I listened to one severe tornadic storm outside of Arkansas. I had 2 of those going. One was doing the amateur radio net, the other was highway patrol. Guess who was more professional and more appropriate for the situation? The amateur radio. The troopers were going nuts. The amateur radio operators, calm, following the book. And I'm not to say that's always the case, but you can learn by listening. I mean, why not try to experience as much as you can? You can stream the local TV stations. Man, if they have a helicopter, they're going to be live streaming it, which Kansas City, Oklahoma City, a lot of those places. And then also I have access to NWS chat. I can get any of those across the country and pull those up. So I will do tons of virtual spotting because I'm always saying, okay, I'm watching the radar. Where would I be? Where would I go? You know, sometimes you just can't keep up with them because of the road networks, and you just got to give up. So we're going to finish up with an analysis of the El Reno tornado. This was an EF5 tornado that was coming along. Now, one thing I had in a note earlier, but I didn't talk about is supercells that become right movers. If they're going in a given direction, they start to veer to the right. That normally means they're strengthening. What they're doing is they're feeding into that warm air, and that warm air is driving the storm. It's pulling into that warmer, moisture air. And so a right mover, such as this right here, should be a sign that that is going to intensify and persist. And that's what it did. Now, all these green dots are people on the spotter network. Maybe 100 dots, give or take. That's probably about 1/5 of the number of people that were out there. Those are only people who have taken the test on spotter network to be able to get on it. And there are plenty of others out there. Now, when we look at our risk assessment, situational awareness, we say being south is safest, right? Well, what's south? The Canadian River. The only place to cross it is clear back here or down at the highway. And I was told, or I've read, the highway patrol shut off people going south to get across the bridge to escape. Literally made no sense if that were the fact. What really changed this is this explosively expanded both in size and forward speed. It actually sped up as it made this bow. And then we talk about right movers. It made its right move when it got strong, but then it made that left hook. And it got twice as wide with a lot of satellite vortices. And the satellite vortices is what caught a lot of people off guard. This is the one that killed Tim Samaras It was a semi-professional storm chaser, his son, and another guy, and I think there was somebody else that was killed. They were in a very small car and it got rolled a mile out into a field. It was going so fast, they just couldn't get away from it on the dirt roads. And I think they got caught by a satellite tornado, probably thinking the main tornado was farther behind them than it was. But where are you going to go? We call this area up here, remember I said we had the tornado, we have a little open area called the vault, and then this is where the heavy hail is. That area up there is often called the Bear's Cave. Heavy hail, heavy rain, and if you're chasing from the north-south into that, you just can drive into the tornado, because by the time you come out of the tornado, you're in the vault, or you're in the vault. Every time you come out of the heavy hail and rain, you're right there in the storm, and without radar or something, you don't know where it is. One thing about radar, remember, it's always a few minutes behind. Even when they're in the fast lapping for a tornado, it's about 6 minutes per cycle. Well, that thing moved a lot in 6 minutes, and it probably made the turn, I don't know. The people that were killed, I believe, were up in this area right here. But if you look, the escape to the south is blocked a little bit by the river. To the north, getting into hail and not knowing where you are is probably safest. The really only safe place to go would have been back, if you had that option. Or find a safe place to hunt. We'd say you never come to a storm from the north side through the barricades because you come out where the tornado is.
300 miles per hour, quickly rose to a staggering 2.6 miles wide, and is heading right at Bears and his team. And new funnel clouds keep forming, increasing the tornado size.
Huge violent tornado right now approaching Union City, South Dakota.
This is the same tornado
Quickly get into the
looking
car and
south of
speed
the city.
south. But they're too late. The tornado is bearing down.
And there was a moment where, once it got to kind of the left side of our vehicle, then I realized we were going to be hit. And then you just feel this really sudden, violent wind hit you.
You see that all of this is up vortices?
That's why just go. Just keep going. Keep going.
And I just remember violently smashing into the ground over and over again. And I remember being weightless at one point and floating. And then I remember thinking to myself, I have to prepare for a hard landing. The next thing you know, boom, and we hit. We land wheel side down. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm alive. I could not believe it. I thought I was dead.
They drove from the north, tried to literally outrun the tornado. Now, any of you fly or boat, and there's a known factor, if you see an object, you're moving, and it stays at the same angle to you that you're on a collision course with it. If you look back at that video, that tornado sits right here the whole time, which means he's on a collision course with it. And sure enough, he is. And it's wide, and it's going 40 or 50 miles an hour. He'd have to do 100 miles an hour to outrun it. Why did he do it? Because they were on the chunk, the tornado line. This one infuriates me just because it was so avoidable, and you saw the tornado. You'd done better to drive back into the hailstorm and wait a little while and take your risk there instead of the other option. Just finish up. Severe thunderstorm warning, the criteria, you can report less than this, but thunderstorm winds over 58 miles an hour, hail, quarter size or bigger. Tornado warning, we're going to say confirmed tornado, debris on the ground, or the condensation touching the ground, and flash flood warning 6 or more inches of water flowing over the roadway. When we're talking about our amateur radio net, just remember the type of information is got to be kind of contingent on the worst report that's going on at that time. If the worst report's an active tornado, you probably don't need hail reports until that's covered. But early on, you know, when the winds hit, when the rain hits, when the first hail hits, those all may be worthwhile reports so that we can kind of understand the progression of the storm. Thank you, guys. Any questions? Yeah.
Do you remember back when you were showing the wall cloud at the Trent tornado?
Yes.
Can you estimate the timeline from when you was observing the wall cloud until it actually popped down? And was it 10 seconds? Or
No, that one actually was a persistent wall cloud, and I never saw the tornado.
You
from
never
that
did?
one.
Okay.
And I followed it I caught up with it just on the east side of Trenton, went up Y, went all the way back around to Galt.
Oh, to Galt?
To Galt. Is that J that comes into the north of
If
Galt?
you go far enough, you can
I
work your
think.
way there.
So it was a wall cloud. That's how I got all the different angles around it. I did a big U-turn and it had the wall cloud the whole time. The one in Lafayette County, the other video, that one, I got down there. It already spawned a tornado over by Higginsville. When I saw it, the wall cloud develop, I would say that one came down within 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay, not 10 seconds.
No.
Or,
Not from the first time you see the wall cloud, but they can develop. So if you see the Joplin tornado, where it goes actually from a tornado that's a skinny rope tornado to the wedge is like less than 2 minutes.
less than 2 minutes, okay.
So that's again, when you talk about your risk, all these people want to get close, but that thing expanded. Mike?
When Joe was talking about chasing that tornado up in Trenton, I was listening to what he was reporting out at the house. And he was reporting where he was on, I don't know what he was using to reference where he was, but it didn't match what I had to look at to see where he was. And he was outside APRS, so I knew he was